Welcome back to the Hidden History Happy Hour, everyone. And this is exciting for me. This is our first ever official guest co-host on the Hidden History Happy Hour. For those of you who guessed it, you're going to get drinks in London. It's fan favorite, Myke Cole. Welcome back, Myke Cole.
Thank you. Good to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Whilst my friend and co-host Alex Dean is on a much-deserved overseas assignment of joy, the show must go on. And for those of you who follow Alex on social media, I'm sure you already know that congratulations in order. Mazel tov, Alex and Katrina. Katrina Dean, I wish you a lifetime of therapy because you're going to need it, my friend. No, congratulations. They're off on a well-deserved honeymoon, enjoying the time. Alex always manages, by the way, to absent himself from the UK when there's a leadership fight. So he has done it once again. And Myke, so much we could talk about. But first, I got to ask you an immediate question that is from the last 45 minutes. Where's the fire, my friend?
Oh, it's in the town of South Blooming Grove, right next to here. Yeah, for those of you listening, I literally walked in the door 10 minutes ago. You can't see me, but I'm covered in dirt. We were fighting a wildfire out there. Most of our departments out here, we're in these rural areas, we're volunteers. So we get a pager, and if you're not doing your regular job, you jump in the car and you run to the firehouse and you get to work.
Wait. An actual pager?
Yeah, an old school pager sitting out. I mean, I leave it in my bedroom, but yeah, it's pretty embarrassing. The kind that clips on the jeans, it's awful. Yeah.
That's
it's
amazing.
Loud.
It's like a time machine.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
Wow. Well, it is my great good fortune to have you on, Myke. And as our fans know well, Myke Cole is an American author of fantasy, science fiction, and nonfiction, and now history. His book series include the Shadow Ops, Reawakening, and Sacred Throne series. And his career also involves television, having appeared on the CBS reality show Hunted, which may come up a little bit later, and on the Discovery Channel series Contact. And Myke, I noticed in researching your oeuvre over the last couple of days that you have a distinctive, incredibly tight but different colored T-shirt for each show.
That's exactly right. The only really important thing to me is that it is a child's medium. The color is not really what I care about. The pattern is fine. It just must be so tight that I need a shoehorn to get into
it. Yeah, but your fans can immediately tell, is it Hunted or is it Contact? Because the T-shirt.
That's right. Just check the colors.
Also, I learned this. I didn't even know this last time you were on, that your Shadow Ops Control Point novel won the 2013 Compton Cook Award.
It did. Amazing. It did. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, that was quite a surprise in my debut. I moved in more into history since 2020, but fiction was very near and dear to my heart for a while.
Well, I was about to say that Myke is also a real-world cyber detective and intelligence analyst and author of exceptional books of ancient warfare history, including my personal favorite, The Bronze Lie, which we discussed in Hidden History Happy Hour episode 13. So we'll put that in the show notes. Check it out. And also, Myke was our guest live in New York City on episode 20. So check that out too.
It was a good time.
Yeah, it was great to have you there. That still is one of our most popular episodes that we've ever done, Myke. So thanks. And thanks again for co-hosting. Now, being that we are the Hidden History Happy Hour, I have to talk a little bit about my my liquor selection today. And going back to our roots, I am once again drinking bourbon. However, Myke Cole, this is a surprise to you. In a salute to all of Myke's and my friends in the special operations community, I am drinking a local Seattle distillery called Heritage Special Operations First Special Forces Group Whiskey number 7. And this was created in conjunction with the 1st Special Forces Detachment at Fort Lewis McChord in beautiful Tacoma, Washington. Handcrafted by Heritage's master distillers. It's a mighty tasty blend of bourbon, rye, and single malt whiskey, aged in New American oak. I didn't know that until I looked it up. And most importantly, a portion of all the proceeds from this whiskey goes to Special Forces charities, and sales have helped raise $140,000 for worthy causes such as scholarship funds for children of Special Forces members. And Myke, given your history in the intelligence community, I'm sure you remember Johnny Mike Spann, the first American casualty in Afghanistan after 9/11.
Sure, that's wonderful. No, it's great. I'm glad that you're supporting that charity, man. Thank you.
I was a part of setting up the original scholarship fund for Johnny Mike Spann's family many years ago, and proud to support this. And it's damn good whiskey too. So everybody out there, buy it, order it. It's going to be good, and you're supporting an amazing cause.
Thanks.
And even though we are a somewhat liquor-based show, we are a large tent. I'm sure sometime soon we'll have cannabis folks on. Myke is not drinking alcohol today, but you're equally welcome, and it might be good because you might keep me on track on the story.
Yeah, man, and I think like I just can't come off a job like that and start drinking. I'm sure like
No.
a lot of the guys are home doing it. But I'll just make myself sick. I need to come down first.
Yes, I agree, and thank you for doing that. It's I'm sure you've saved many lives since you've been. So this is like your, I don't know, I can't keep count, but like your fourth full-time job as volunteer firefighter, right?
I think it's like it's sort of a standard cursus honorum, to use a Latin term, is that you do your military intelligence career, and then when you get out and you go into the private sector, you want something because look, what do? We do cyber jobs, right? We're doing investigation, we're looking at computers, we're doing forensics on logs, and you miss your action days, you miss ground pounding, and where can you do that if you're not going to be a cop, or you're not going to still be active in the military, and it's in the fire service. So when you check the pedigrees of a lot of the firefighters in these communities out here, we all are vets and we're all former cops, and we all just want to keep that action going. We're sort of adrenaline junkies who can't put it down.
Yeah, but also maybe can't jump out of airplanes as easily as 20 years ago.
We're getting old and creepy for sure. I still
I
got a
mean,
few years in me yet.
to be fair, I am equally skilled as I was 20 years ago because then I had zero skills and now I still have zero skills. So I'm keeping it up.
There's something to be said for consistency, Bryan. That's very well done.
So we are going to get to one of Alex's stories in just a moment. But first, I owe our listeners and viewers a book report because in our last episode, I mentioned that I was going to be reading as part of my October tradition. Every year, I try to read some classic horror fiction or hopefully new classic horror fiction. So I was going to read Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. You know this book, Myke?
It's a fantastic book. Paul and I crossed paths multiple times when I was
Get out.
My fiction days. Yeah, sure. I've met Paul many times. That is one of my favorite books by him. It is amazing. It is easily.
I swear to our viewers and listeners, we didn't set this up. I don't think Myke has watched our last episode. Myke, I bought this in an airport on my way back from Italy in September, and I determined to read it in October.
Buckle up. It is one of the best horror books ever written. It's in the same, I consider it to be on the same plane as Shirley Jackson. And if I'm remembering correctly, I reviewed it. If people go to my Goodreads account, I think I wrote an absolutely stellar review of that book. You are in for
well, this is an amazing coincidence, which no one will believe, but I'm sure somewhere there are cyber records that would convince people that we didn't coordinate this ahead of time. So, Myke, I am 80% of the way through. I have determined I will finish this on Halloween night. And based on Stephen King's review, as well as yours, I suspect I will not sleep for a number of days after that.
It's absolutely fantastic. The thing I love about it, if I recall correctly, is I just love unreliable narrators. And really, that was the strength of Jackson's Haunting of Hill House. And by the way, for those of you who are fans of the TV show, only the name matches. The book, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, with the unreliable narrators, got nothing to do with it. And Tremblay, I think, admittedly channeled that very thing, that keeping the reader uneasy because you can't tell if the narrator is telling the truth or not. And it's so hard to pull that off because if the narrator is completely unreliable, the reader just unhooks from the book. But Tremblay nails it. He walks the line perfectly. That book is amazing.
For sure. And there's a great reality TV angle to the book as well, Myke, which you and I have been involved with. The interesting, though, we might have a slight disagreement here because I love The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. However, I also love the Myke Flanagan TV series, The Haunting of Hill House, even though they're completely different.
Yeah, well, no, don't get me wrong. The Haunting of Hill House is, I think, one of the best TV shows, horror TV shows ever made. The only point I was making is that it only shares the name with the book. And
you're right.
The stories are completely different. But no, don't take that wrong. I think it's a fantastic television show.
And you're right. And unfortunately, this will air after Halloween 2022. But next year, Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, slightly less good. I still liked it. It's very atmospheric, not as good. But the midnight hour that Myke Flanagan dropped this October, amazing.
I got to see that. I got to see that. The suggestion.
If there's no fires between now and the end of Halloween, you should binge that because it is quite amazing.
Waiting for that pager to go off, so we'll see.
Yeah, fair. All right, look. So I do not have the nerve to try to paraphrase Alex Dean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read his story almost verbatim, and we're going to challenge Alex when he comes back from his joyous overseas investigation to find the 2 or 3 little nuggets that I modified just a little bit from his story. And then,
Okay.
Myke, we're going to ask you to comment on this as the only legitimate historian among all three of us.
Oh
So,
boy.
as we would have said in our prior life, Myke, we have multiple levels of deniability. Alex wrote the story. He's not here. I'm reading the story, but I modified it. You're about to hear what I read, and you had no knowledge of that, and you know the true story.
Well, I'm going to do my best, but I do want to note I'm really nervous because I have two good friends. One is Dr. Michael Livingston of the Citadel.
Yes.
The other is Dr. Kelly DeVries of Loyola University. And they are, remember, I'm an ancient warfare historian and more recently an early modern warfare historian with a new book I'm working on. But these two guys are medievalists, and they are medievalists who wrote a book together on Pen and Sword Press on the Battle of Hastings and Stamford Bridge, which led up to it. So I am so terrified that they're going to hear me commenting on it on this one. And I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it port and starboard after
Well,
this.
so before we get to this, Myke, talk about your new book. Is it with Livingston or what is
No,
it?
so I've got two more coming. Yes, so Dr. Livingston and I are working on a book called The Killing Ground: A Biography of Thermopylae, and that's covering all of the battles of Thermopylae, not just the one in 480 BC that the movie 300 was made about.
Right.
Over 20 battles fought there, all the way up until World War II, and we're asking the question, why? Why are all these people killing themselves and killing each other over this tiny strip of ground in the middle of nowhere? Because it truly is in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And
Not called
that
the Peaceful
manuscript.
Gates.
It'll be turned in January and published the following year. And then I should be announcing, and I feel safe enough to say it here shortly. I'm just waiting on the deal memo. My new book, Steel Lobsters: The Last Knights in England. And that's about the last heavily armored cavalry regiment. So think like fully armored knights, but with guns instead of lances, that fought in the English Civil War in 1643. They only were in full armor for a month, and their story is absolutely amazing. I can't believe nobody's written a book about it yet.
But
So
why, but Myke, why lobsters? Were they amphibious with all that
no,
armor?
no, because covered in their steel metal carapaces, because they fought in 1643, a time when heavy armor was already obsolete. People said, "Man, look at those lobsters," because they were covered in metal, because it was such a strange sight.
I am no military expert, as you know, Myke, but I gotta believe that heavy armor and amphibious warfare don't go well together.
No, just look at the Civil War ironclads and
Yeah.
their checkered history, and you'll get a clue on that.
Fair. All right. So look, I'm gonna now tell the story from the unbelievably creatively named More Lessons from History by Alex Dean.
Well done.
Chapter 23, and it's entitled That Was My Brother. Now, let me say, as a person sitting in the United States of America on October 30th, 2022, I still have no access to this book, Amazon. I have to have literally, and Myke does too, literally, Alex Dean took photos of the pages from his book and texted them to us. That's how we know this story. So let's come on, get on the stick. It's Christmas, it's the holidays. Let's get this book out there.
Mm.
That Was My Brother. Myke, this story takes place in that little historically noted year of 1066 at the Stamford, not Stanford with an N, Stamford with an M, although I will note that the UCI sponsored cybersecurity team that my institute sponsored did beat Stanford a couple of years ago, but that's a different story.
Well done.
The Stamford Bridge in what is now Fulham is probably how you say it, adjacent to Chelsea in West London. Now, I'm going to tell this story, but Alex requires that I preface it thusly. Given the current tussle for Stamford Bridge, and Myke, as Alex notes in the book, at the time he was writing it, the ownership of the Chelsea Football Club, which apparently plays at a ground called Stamford Bridge, was in question after Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich was sanctioned by the British government. For those dying to know, Myke, I can report, courtesy of the interwebs, that as of May 2022, after Alex wrote the book and turned it into his publisher, American billionaire Todd Boehly, I probably pronounced that wrong, led a group of other billionaires in buying the Chelsea Football Club from Abramovich for a whopping, are you ready for this, $5.4 billion in the most expensive sports purchase in history.
Mm.
Are you a soccer fan, Myke?
I mean, I watch the FIFA World Cup every 4 years, but I don't follow the games in between.
I have become a bit of a football fan, English football fan, from the TV show Ted Lasso.
Of course,
and the reality show based on the TV show, with Ryan Reynolds about the Wrexham Wales team. So this is
Yeah.
what I know about soccer.
Ted Lasso's a
Also,
wonderful
oh my God, it's I don't really love sports shows. I don't really love 30-minute comedies, and I know nothing about football, soccer, but even when it's a sad, tragic story, I come away happy somehow.
Well, what I love about Lasso is that if folks remember when Game of Thrones came out on HBO, TV in general took a turn for the dark. Game of
Yeah,
Thrones was such a successful TV show, and it was successful because it was so brutal and so
yeah.
black. And Lasso was a deliberate and self-conscious effort to swing it back the other way. And boy, did it. And I'm so grateful for it. What a wonderful show.
Yeah, it's if for anyone that hasn't seen it, don't worry if you don't like soccer, don't worry if you
Yeah.
don't like sports shows, don't worry if you don't like situation comedies. It will brighten your life. It
Yeah.
just will. Trust me on that. Also, Myke, I checked a few minutes ago, and unlike many of his fellow Russian oligarchs, Roman Abramovich has not fallen from a high window or otherwise expired under mysterious circumstances since Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Rather, he appears to be alive and well, sporting triple citizenship, Russia, Israel, and Portugal, and has moved up to 4 of his super yachts to Turkey, where he appears to have taken up residence.
Well, I guess they're going to keep us from seizing them, in an effort to put pressure on Putin. It's a good move for him.
I have taken a speedboat around the super yacht seized by Myke's former agency, the U.S. Coast Guard, south of San Diego.
Very proud. Very proud.
Very proud. Enough of that. Alex brings us the most interesting story to be taken away from the original Battle of the Heralds. Okay, now everyone concentrate. There are 2 principal characters in this story with the same name. And fun fact, Myke Cole, which I bet you don't even know because I don't like to talk about the H word, is that happens to be my first name.
It's your first name? Your first name's Bryan.
Harold is my first name.
Really?
Yes.
Now,
Bryan is my middle name.
Hold on. I don't want to crib on the story, but is it the Norwegian spelling?
We don't, it's no, it's the English spelling, Harold. Yep. It's a family thing. We don't want to get into it. But anyway.
I was about to say, it's a good thing you didn't tell me. I would have been calling you Your Excellency the whole time we were on.
So many people do. I don't even like to talk about it. But look, let's jump into the Wayback Machine, shall we? Mm-hmm. It's 1066. Edward the Confessor has died, and the wise men of England have made Harold of England the king, as Edward himself recommended. But Harold's brother, Tostig, erstwhile Earl of Northumbria, and here I'm going to note, Alex Dean, when you watch this on your overseas assignment, you go back and forth between Northumbria and Northumberland, and we're going to talk about that when you get back. But Harold's brother, Tostig, erstwhile Earl of Northumbria, had been accused of various bits of bad behavior, like, bumping off house guests, and he was exiled during Edward's reign, despite being Edward's brother-in-law. I don't accept that despite, by the way. I've been married before, and brother-in-laws are not to be trusted. Am I right?
Absolutely not.
In any event, he fomented dissent against the king. He plundered the countryside, as one does, and eventually he joined forces with Harold of Norway. Perhaps, Myke Cole, you can see where this is headed.
I can indeed.
So I'm going to butcher the names as always. We'll get letters. Harold Hardrada, aka
Harold Hardrada. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. AKA. Say the next part for me.
Harold Sigurdsson.
That guy, AKA Harold of Norway, styled as Harald in his own country, but plain old Harold to the Anglospheric historian, had designs upon Britain, and Tostig was a useful enough sidekick in developing them. Norwegian Harold was a tough nut with more than a decade of mercenary life under his belt before he developed monarchic tendencies. In the days when kings and would-be kings fought for their own battles, this mattered. Myke Cole, historian, when did that end? When did kings stop heading into battle themselves?
Oh, good Lord. That's a really tough question. I'm trying to think. I mean, in this book that I'm working on, 1643, King Charles, Charles Stuart, Charles I was still involved in battles. He was present at the Battle of Edge Hill that started the English Civil War. So I would say not until deep until the modern age.
Way past our story, right?
Way past.
Yeah. So, Harold of Norway and Tostig sailed with their forces, principally Norwegian, reinforced by forces from Orkney, Flanders, and Scotland, up the, I will not be able to pronounce this, Ouse River, Ouse, Myke?
Ouse River, yes.
Ouse River, and promptly seized York. Harold of England was down south, awaiting an expected invasion by William the Conqueror. Spoiler, but not for this story. Harold of England marched north with his forces at such a speed that he took the Norwegians and their allies by surprise. Thus, on 25 September at Stamford Bridge in Yorkshire along the Derwent River, two armies faced each other, relatively evenly matched at a little over 10,000 men each, but with Harold of Norway's forces rather unprepared for a fight, and with 1/3 of their number back at their ships, who joined the battle eventually, Alex says, but rather too late, whilst Harold of England's forces were without such disadvantages. So
There's one little detail that Alex may have left out there, and that is that the 2/3 that Harold's men brought up to the bridge left their armor on their ships. And that was a major factor, at least according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle.
And this was to move quickly and lightly, or just
move quickly to take the bridge, right? So that they could, funnel the English forces into a choke point.
And does this echo down the ages, Myke? Because I would assume that even today, armor versus speed is still a thing.
It still is a thing, and it was even a thing in the ancient world. I was just writing an article for Ancient Warfare magazine about how Greek hoplite armor declined across the classical period, thousands of years before this battle. And that was, we believe, although it's certainly not decided, a decision that when you're facing Persian archers and other kinds of missile troops, you're better off risking getting hit with an arrow with no armor, but closing more quickly than you are wearing heavy armor and being slower.
Well, all of my experience in this area, Myke, revolves around the golf course. But I would much rather be cold than have my swing inhibited by a heavy jacket. So that's my heroic story related to this.
Yeah, no,
anyway,
definitely proves the point.
Famously, the bridge over the river that was contested was supposedly held by one ferocious Nordic warrior who defeated all comers. I mean, this sounds like David and Goliath stuff, like there was single combat, until an Englishman took a little boat underneath the bridge and stabbed him from below in the unmentionables.
Half a barrel, not a boat, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Floated under there in a split barrel.
Well, I mean, it floated and it was moving, so it was a boat, right?
Not according to the United States Coast Guard. It would not have passed.
Fair enough. I'm now flashing back to Myke, as you know, as a frequent guest on our show. Alex and I frequently, I've said frequently, too frequently now, but we often talk about the West Wing, and the pilot episode includes the line where the Cubans are mostly coming in fruit baskets, pretty much. So maybe that's the thing. But however, Alex shied away from this part of the story. He didn't want to talk about the unmentionables. So let me stop here, because Alex may not have wanted to tell it after, by the way, single-handedly destroying our family-friendly rating while I was sampling limoncello in Italy 2 weeks ago. But I do want to tell it. Okay. Thoughts? Fair dinkum? Is all fair in love and war? If you get your basket underneath a bridge, should you stab the guy in the gonads or not?
You do what you have to do to win, right? I mean, it isn't just, look, if this champion is holding the bridge and that's going to cause your army to lose and is killing your compatriots, well, you're saving lives effectively by taking that advantage. I don't think there's honor in it.
Kidding aside, war is killing, right? And I get a little uncomfortable with a lot of the modern discussion of you didn't observe all the protocols. Of course, you got to observe Geneva. You have to do everything by international convention, but you kill the person the way you got to kill the person, right?
War is a thing of brutal necessity. Look, and you find that those conventions fall away very, very quickly out of necessity, even no matter how much honor is involved. But I do want to say that this story of a single warrior holding the bridge, I can't say it is not true. But what I can say is that I have seen this story before in other sources, in other tales so often that it's almost like a trope. And I would encourage your listeners to look up the story of Horatius at the Bridge, which is an ancient, I think, under the Roman monarchy, before Rome was even a republic, a similar story that that almost, you know, line for line matches this one. And you will find other stories like that throughout history. So it does make me suspicious, because I do know that chroniclers of this period were very familiar with the tropes of the classics, that they might have been influenced by it.
Me too. Why do you think it would have been in the interest of the chroniclers to put it this way? Why couldn't it have been a squad of people or a battalion of people?
I'm not sure, and I think I would have to know more about sort of Anglo-Saxon conceptions of the role of the champion, and what individual heroism means. But I do think it simply is for a much more dramatic story. A single champion against all comers, adds a lot of tension in a way that a group of men can.
And we've talked in prior discussions, Myke, of the value of story, whether or not it's exactly historically accurate. So I'm going to give my pal Alex the benefit of the doubt, especially when he's out on his honeymoon. So
Why
I'm just
not?
going to continue with the story as written. Before a battle began, a score of Englishmen, armored up to the eyes, that's like a lot of armor,
Mhm.
rode from the English host toward the Viking lines to parley. Now let's stop a minute and talk about parley. Here's what I know about parley. What I know about parley comes from Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl.
A
So
great source. That'll serve you well.
what is at this time in 1066, I assume you could discuss under truce, but what's the reliability of that? And could you kill the person that was riding up to you, or what was the story there?
I mean, I'm sure it certainly happened, and you could, and I'm sure there are plenty of examples of that. But no, flag of parley was supposed to guarantee the safety of the person engaged in it, and while you were under that flag, you were supposed to be able to negotiate. And the idea was to possibly avoid a battle, to grant concessions, to gain concessions. I'm sort of, but in racking my brain, I think in most cases it usually led to battle.
Well, this will become very important at the end of our story, and I'm sure you have some thoughts on the portrayal in the 300 when they toss the messenger down the, I don't know, whatever, ring of hell or whatever they did. But let's
Oh
continue.
well, yeah.
Before battle began, as I said, a score of Englishmen armored up to the eyes rode from the English host towards the Viking lines to parley. One of the Englishmen shouted towards the Norse lines, "Is Earl Tostig amongst you?" In perhaps the first recorded double negative in our tongue, Tostig shouted back, "And it cannot be said that he is not." And I love Alex, our absent friend's description of that, because I'm sure that wasn't the first, but it's an amazing example
Pretty
of
epic.
a double negative.
Yeah.
The Englishman replied, "Our king greets his brother and says that he shall have Northumberland." And now in my notes, I have parentheses because Alex says Northumberland and Northumbria.
Right.
Again, indeed, rather than his brother should be the enemy, he will give him a third of his kingdom. So this, as I understand the story, Myke, was the offer that was on the table before they killed a bunch of his countrymen, right?
Right, but also like this strikes me as very cynical if you understand the history of Tostig and Harold. Tostig was ousted from Northumbria after a rebellion occurred, and Edward the Confessor sent Harold, then an earl, to negotiate with those rebels. And Harold took a look at the situation, realized that Tostig's goose was cooked, and advised him to exile him, to declare him an outlaw and get him out of there. So I can't imagine that, and look, it's a great story, but I can't imagine that Harold was in great earnest. Yeah, he's going to give him a third of his kingdom, and probably while Tostig is sleeping, that third of the kingdom will be taken back accompanied by a dagger. So, I take that one with a grain of salt.
Also, it could be the crappy third, right? So like when the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the founding days were happening, they wanted a capital that would not be controlled by any state. So of course, Virginia and Maryland gave up their shittiest property to the federal government. All right, let me continue. Tostig, says Alex Dean, with some truth to what he said, it must be admitted, responded that if only such fair words had been offered to him last winter, many men who had died in the fraternal dispute would instead have lived. And so he asked his interlocutor, "What will my brother, King Harold of England, give my ally, King Harold of Norway, for his toil. So, first of all, Michael, how confusing is this? And second of all the monarchs called themselves brothers, even if they weren't actually related, right?
Well, there's a sort of a brotherhood of kings, right? That when that being royal transcends boundaries of state and language, and there are certain dignities that are owed to men of royal blood. So yeah, I'm not surprised that that kind of courtesy was offered. But as you are about to tell us in the story, it's not particularly courteous toward Harold Hardrada.
And also, I don't think there's a transcript of that conversation. In any event,
Yeah.
according to Alex Dean, the Englishman replied that the king would give the Norseman 6 feet of English ground in which he would forever rest, or perhaps a little more on account of his famous height. I doubt there was that many people that were over 6 feet at that
Uh,
point, right? But Myke, I have to interrupt myself again here. Being in the presence of not only an actual historian, but indeed a student of the process of history, I'm always highly skeptical of the catchphrase uttered by historical figures. I think we know that nuts was actually telegrammed by an American commander during World War II, but how
yeah.
much can we rely on this stuff?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we can't. But the thing that's so troubling about it is that dismissing it out of hand is just as ahistorical as accepting
Yeah.
it. This is a time before things are recorded by audio or video. All we have are the chronicler's statements. And in this case, and again, I'll repeat this for your listeners because it's available in
Yeah.
translation online. I think most people can find it. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is a series of chronicles of the history of the Anglo-Saxons that was still being updated, if I'm correct, 200 years after, 100
Yeah.
to 200 years after the Battle of Stamford Bridge and the Battle of Hastings was fought. And the chroniclers put it in there, and we have no more reason to disbelieve them than to believe them. So the only responsible answer is, and this is something historians have a lot of trouble with, because if we keep saying this, why do they need us? The answer is, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Or is it that the outcome tells us that some version of what's been recorded is probably pretty close to true?
I mean, sure, and we can work backwards from those outcomes. And in some cases, if we have multiple sources that we can compare to each other, we can get closer to the truth. And if we can compare those literary sources to an archaeological record, an inscription, or something, that gets us there. But in the case of this quip, this brilliant quip, which I've heard translated as he gets 7 feet of English ground because he's taller than the rest, right? All we have is the literary source. And all I can say to you, Bryan, is, man, I hope it's true because it is so badass.
It is. It is one of those stories, and I've told a few of these about Lyndon Johnson and Abraham Lincoln and George W. Bush, where if they're not true, they should be true.
They should be true.
Well, let me continue. So Earl Tostig apparently then says, "The battle it is then, for I shan't betray my friends." And thus it was, according to Alex Dean, that any hopes of peace were dashed and the Battle of Stamford Bridge became inevitable. As the English horsemen rode back into their lines, Harold asked Tostig, "Who was that Englishman who talked to us?" And Tostig replied, "That was my brother." And so Harold Hardrada berated him and said, why he had come so close to our lines. If we had known it was him, then he would not have returned to his own. So, Myke, does this call into question the entire Pirates of the Caribbean concept of parlay? Like, if he's talking peace, they shouldn't have killed him, right?
Well, but here's the thing. That's where I doubt it far too much. Harold Godwinson knew very well that his person, if lost, would doom the entire English cause here. There is no way he is riding up alone to his brother, who would recognize him and who absolutely would have taken advantage of it, a parlay or no parlay. And there are plenty of examples of this. Again, I keep pulling ancient ones, but if
Yeah.
folks know Xenophon's famous March on Country, Up Country, the Anabasis, was triggered by the Battle of Cunaxa, where the young Cyrus had hired these Greek mercenaries, and even though they won the battle, Cyrus was killed, and so their cause was lost, and they had to retreat all the way back. That certainly, with charismatic leaders, was the case, and I think that Harold would never have taken that risk of putting himself directly into his enemy's hands, and I can't imagine Tostig could have resisted the
So
temptation.
you think he wasn't there?
I think that a herald went forward with
And
those.
Herald.
Yes, not a herald. A herald went forward to make those demands, to make that offer, while Harold was safely at distance.
Well, I've now cleverly maneuvered myself into another movie recommendation, which is Kenneth Branagh, Henry V,
Yes,
where
absolutely.
the Herald has a major role. Okay, so I'm going to continue with the story. So, according to Alex Dean, who's not here to defend himself, so I'm going to just keep quoting his ass. Tostig agreed that it had not been wise of Harold to come so close, but observed that he had betrayed his identity, then he would have been his murderer. If one of them must be my murderer, then I should be his. I think I might have mangled that, but I think the idea is that according to Alex's story, Tostig is saying, I knew everything was at risk and I don't want to kill my brother. I want my brother to kill me. Is that, am I?
You got it right, but I'm just filled with doubt. Look, I understand that in 1066, conceptions of honor were more deeply held, perhaps, than they are in America in 2022. But
Well, that's for sure.
from what I know of the stakes, and from what I know from looking at ancient warfare and other medieval battles, I just I just can't imagine Tustin would have cared. I think he would have jumped.
What do you think actually happened, Myke?
I think a herald went forward. I think a herald went forward with the same demands. I think that he offered Tostig a concession to try to get Tostig to turn coat on Harold Hardrada. I think that Harold Godwinson, had Tostig turned coat, would have murdered him immediately and reneged on his own deal. And I think that Tostig stuck with Harold Hardrada because he thought that that was who was going to win. They held a good position on that bridge, and the Norwegian reputation was ferocious. And as you said, Harold of Norway had an incredible reputation as a war leader. And the English, mind you, were exhausted from
Yeah.
racing north
Well,
to Stamford.
this is what I want to talk about. I'm going to finish the story, then I'm going to ask you that exact question. So the end of Alex's story is this. Tostig gets a bad write-up in the history books. The traitor, the Grima Wormtongue of his age, the man who allied himself with his country's and his family's enemies for personal advancement because of his jealousy and ambition. Not the devil, but perhaps the guy who crosses the street to buy the devil a pack of cigarettes. And by the way, Alex Dean, I love that so much. I'm going to plagiarize the shit out of that in 20 articles from now on. So then he says, the exchange at Stamford Bridge gives a rather different context, doesn't it? And then he concludes, those few poignant shouted sentences across the battle lines, the forlorn offer of peace and land, and the insistence that alliances could not be given up, the words that left unsaid the identity of the king so that he lived, those sad words were the last time the brothers spoke. The battle was fought and Tostig died. And later on that year, William came as expected and England fell before him. Alex says, I am not sure that much went through Harold's mind at Hastings as he lost the kingdom and his life, but I like to think, even in the last lament of a defeated king, that his brother was amongst his thoughts. Had they reconciled, who knows? Stamford Bridge might have been avoided, and Harold's forces at Hastings, all the stronger as a result, might have prevailed. So, Myke Cole, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. 1, am I right that the Norman conquest in 1066 led to 300 plus years of such dominance that the English language was barely written, at least in public documents? 2, based on my very limited understanding of the Battle of Hastings, William's victory had at least as much to do with mismanagement, exhaustion, and retreat by the English forces as any superiority by William's forces in text. True? If so, any lessons for Russia and Ukraine today? And 3, if Harold and Tostig had made peace, would it have made any difference?
All right. These are some tough ones. The first one, are you right that the Norman conquest led to 300 years of the English language barely being written in public documents? Yes. However, so Anglo-Norman, which is the court language, the French that William would have spoken when he won at Hastings, was indeed for 3 centuries the administrative language of England, the court language of England. However, it was less common than Latin. So you were far more likely to read Latin in official documents of that period than you are to Anglo-Norman French. And
Okay.
both of those languages, along with Greek and some German, contributed to Middle English and to the English that you and I are speaking right now. Your second question, did William the Conqueror's victory at Hastings have to do with mismanagement and exhaustion and retreat by the English forces? No, I don't agree with
Really?
that. First of all, so the Battle of Stamford Bridge, if I remember correctly, was fought on the 25th of September. Hastings was fought 3 weeks later. Alex says later in the year, which might give your readers the impression much later in the year. No way. Harold won at Stamford Bridge, turned around and ran the full length of England back down to the south coast to fight William. However,
but that would also have wiped out his forces, right? Like, wouldn't they be exhausted when they got there?
so that is a point that scholars have debated ferociously and still debate today. And the Battle of Hastings was an all-day battle, but battlefield analysis at the tactical level indicates that Harold's forces fought like wild dogs, and that exhaustion was probably not a factor. But I don't want to say that isn't in dispute. What may have been a factor is that Saxon armies in 1066 were levies, specifically called the Fyrd, F-Y-R-D, that were called from their farms to come up and fight. And because the fall was coming on 8 September, before Harold marched north to the 25th September, he disbanded his army in the south.
Are you telling me that they had to go home and plant the fields?
They had to go home.
Holy shit.
Work. That's right. And that is considered a major factor. Another factor, a lot of historians ask, well, look, why didn't Harold take his time going south? Why didn't he gather more forces? And that is also in dispute. Some people think that he wanted to catch William on the beach and prevent him from establishing a beachhead. Others think that he doubted the loyalty of his lords. Remember, in medieval England in 1066, the king didn't have central control. He had barons that ruled locally on his behalf, and there may have been some issues in trustworthiness there. But scholars, I think, largely do agree that disband on the 8th of September absolutely affected the course of history in terms of William's victory. Now, your final question there, if Harold and Tostig had made peace, would it have made any difference? Absolutely. It would have meant a very, very quick end to the Norwegian forces. And I firmly believe that Harold had no intention of sharing power with his brother. Tostig would have been dispatched or exiled very, very quickly after that betrayal. But it would have meant far fewer casualties. And certainly whatever forces Tostig had brought with him would have joined Harold, and it might have resulted in a different outcome. You mentioned retreat by the English. Now, this is something that, again, with Hastings and a lot of these early battles, a lot of these things are in dispute. But a feigned retreat by Norman forces broke the English shield wall, which is to say a lack of discipline on Harold's troops when they saw the Normans fleeing caused them to break the wall of shields that they had formed that the Normans were bouncing off of to pursue them. And then when the Normans turned, they were caught out in the open. Now, I know this is disputed, but it's interesting is Alex has it as a retreat by the English. And of course, it would be a retreat by the Norman forces, or a feigned retreat that may have had an impact there.
Feigned retreat. That just seems ungentlemanly.
Well, there's a long history. In fact, Herodotus talks about the Spartans, or rather the allied Greek forces at Thermopylae in 480 BC, also doing a feigned retreat to try to get the Persians to close with them to equal effect.
So, Myke, what lessons do you draw from this tale, and how much of it do you think is apocryphal?
Look, I certainly believe there was a Battle of Stamford Bridge. I certainly believe that Tostig and Harald Hardrada were allied. I certainly believe that Harold raced north after disbanding his army and defeated them there, and then raced south and lost to William the Conqueror. Yeah. It is only in the details, these cool catchphrases, this story of a lone warrior on the bridge, that I raise an eyebrow. And it can't be proven either way, but I will return to, have you read The Life of Pi or seen the movie?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Sure. So for those of you out there, for your listeners and readers out there, I don't
put it in the show notes. Yeah.
I don't want to spoil the story for you, but the whole point of Life of Pi is that when you have two competing narratives and you can't prove either one, but they both just provide flavor to the same core truth, then you pick the story you like better. And in the case of Stamford Bridge, I like the story of the badass catchphrase. I like the story of the lone Dane defending that bridge. I like the story of Harold rushing north and south. It's a far more dramatic tale, and it doesn't change the stakes. So, what do you got to lose by listening to it?
And you can learn from all of it, right? You know, I mean, are there any lessons we can take away from this to the current, let's say, Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Sure. So, and I think that moral authority is a big one. And here's the thing.
Yes.
Look, invasions are almost always cynical and self-interested, no matter what you say. We're fighting for freedom. We're fighting to liberate these people. In the end, I remember going into Iraq. At least myself and the people who went there, we had the best of intentions. We really believed that we were fighting for freedom. We really believed that we were fighting to protect the United States. And I remember coming home to my friends saying, you fought for Kellogg, Brown and Root. You fought to make money for oil companies. And no matter how firmly I believed in my own cause, that cynical narrative, I couldn't disprove it, right? They were able to show ways in which that could be considered to be true. That idea of moral
Let me
authority.
just stop you right there, Myke.
Sure.
It's a future episode. I think I can disprove that.
Oh, okay. Okay. I will be looking forward to that.
Come back on.
Do that future episode. That would be wonderful. That would certainly help me in a lot of arguments I've had with my friends. But that idea of moral authority is critical.
Yeah.
That you are in the right, and that's critical to ensuring the support of the populace, to ensuring that you can recruit troops, to ensuring that those troops are going to stick with you when they suffer reverses. And I think that one of the things that we've seen in Ukraine is that Russia ceded the moral authority immediately. Yeah. And they lost the social media war on day one. And you can say Zelensky is an incredible leader in a lot of ways, but one way in which he is beyond gifted is actually something that he shares in common with Ronald Reagan. They were both entertainers. Absolutely. They were both guys who know how to be in front of the camera and how to tell a story to an audience. And man, has that worked out well for you.
And by the way, Churchill was a journalist in the interregnum between World War I and World War II.
Yep, and talk about badass quips. Like, I mean, there are books written of all the cool crap.
This is starting to be a almost irresistible narrative, and I don't want to put it quite this crassly, but like, if you're in a war, don't you want a sitcom star as your guy?
Absolutely, absolutely. Right? I mean, especially now, and look, it's so incredible to watch the Russia-Ukraine conflict unfold. Is that it's the first war I've ever seen that's fought on social media. It's a Twitter war. Oh, and it's a Twitter war with Ukraine cleaning Russia's clock. It's incredible. Incredible.
Yeah. And now you have it's like multiple halls of mirrors. You have the guy who is now literally in charge of Twitter, supplying a fundamental combat capability to one side, but kind of nobody really knows where he stands.
Yeah, well, he tweeted out Musk tweeted out some stuff the other day questioning sort of Ukraine's right to resist, or maybe sort of talking we might be better off, gratifying Putin, which he certainly came in my opinion, well-deserved criticism for that position. But hey, look,
absolutely.
As long as he keeps giving the Ukrainians Starlink, I'll take it. He can say whatever he wants.
1,000%.
Okay, Myke.
Hey, look, we're gonna if the gods align, we're gonna have you back on next week because Alex will still be honeymooning, which I'm a little jealous of, but yeah, it should be fun. But I got to ask you one last question before we close. You have spent thousands of barrels of ink very persuasively debunking the notion that the Spartans were the greatest military of all time. I'm persuaded. What is the greatest military of all time, or is that not even a reasonable question to ask?
It is a perfectly reasonable question, but you're not going to like my answer. So there is a concept in military history called Praetorianism, and it's a word we use off of the Praetorian Guard, the famous bodyguard of the Roman.
Yeah, the Romulans had that.
That's right. Right. This famous bodyguard of the Roman emperors, who, by the way, often wound up killing the emperors they were in charge of.
Right.
And it's this idea that elite military units or elite military performers, like this Danish warrior on the bridge, somehow have this great superiority. And I don't think any serious historian of military history can gratify that. People are people. Units are composed of human beings, certainly elite units. have some moral advantage. Certainly, they may even have skill and technology advantage. But and I always say this, you show me the most badass samurai, the most well-equipped Navy SEAL, the best trained English knight, and I will show you in their ranks examples of them surrendering, betraying their comrades, engaged in friendly fire incidents. So the only answer is that some units of warriors show great heroism and elitism at some times, and at other times they show great failure. And it is in reckoning with the humanity of those elite units and elite warriors that we really do history justice.
So that's not so much disappointing, Myke, as it is a dodge,
It's
because
not.
no, I get it. I wonder. I've read your writing. I agree with you. Everyone is a human, whether they're a Navy SEAL or whether they're a Spartan or whatever they are. But there has to be some scale. Like you published a whole book, The Bronze Lie, where
Mhm.
you ranked the losses and wins
Mhm.
of the Spartans. So you have to have an opinion on um, at any given period of time who was the best. You got to have an opinion on that.
I mean, you can, but remember, it's in that moment, in that period, right? In some
Fair.
cases, you have these elite units that do incredibly well in one battle, and in the next battle they completely fail. And certain generals that triumph in one battle, and in the next battle completely fail. And I can think of dozens of examples of that from history. Look at, this is the thing, and I'll again quote my friend and mentor, Dr. Michael Livingston, which
Yeah, yeah,
one of the most important things to me as an historian. The important thing is not to be right. The important thing is to get it right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that relentless commitment to the truth, even when it makes the story more boring, is what you have got to do when you're telling these stories. And this is why, like I gave that example from the life of Pi, when the facts of it don't change and you're just enjoying the story, I'm fine with it. But in this case, when we're ranking, when we're going to take a specific, the Achaemenid Persian immortals, these great 10,000 warriors and the 1,000 apple bearers that were Xerxes' personal guard, that had done such amazing things under the reign of Darius. And then they come into Thermopylae, right? And they're just slaughtered, right? So, or at later battles. So, it really does go case by case. It's not a
So are
dodge.
you saying, so Myke, are you saying there's no objectivity to it? There's no way to like rank in a particular battle, in a particular adversary situation at a particular time. These guys were great.
Sure, no,
It
no,
sounds like you're saying you can't do that.
no, you can. You can do it in an individual battle, but what good does that do? Then you're looking at how units performed in an individual battle. If
Well,
you're
but
trying to say who
it's
is the
pretty
best,
good if you're trying to train future units, right?
sure. And look, you can certainly say that a unit had better gear, a unit had better morale, a unit had better training, a unit had better supply. All of that is accurate. Look, I as a regular Coast Guard officer, I wasn't in, our MSRT. A regular, Navy sailor is not a SEAL, right? Those are very, very
Right,
sought after programs that are difficult to get into.
right.
But the problem with Praetorianism is that it mythologizes these units, right? And it sort of implies perfection. Well, we're going to send the Navy SEALs. They're going to get the job done because they're Navy SEALs. Well, they don't always get the job done, do they? Right? Sometimes they fall down. That's the thing that I'm railing against.
So if I'm reading you correctly, you're saying people are people. So why should it be?
Because
All
that's
of the
better than a
people treat
Rickroll,
each other
Bryan.
so awfully.
It's better than a Rickroll. I'll take it.
Myke, this is great.
Thanks.
First of all, you're coming back next week and we're going to rock this shit again. Alex, stay on your honeymoon as long as you want to because we're going to butcher your fucking stories and you already ruined our family rating. So I'm going to say whatever the fuck I want. Myke's coming back. Enjoy your time abroad. And, maybe you'll have a job when you get back.
Congratulations, Alex, and good luck to
Myke,
both of you.
thank you. It's been so great. Thank you for your contribution
My pleasure.
to cybersecurity, to special warfare, to intelligence analysis, to local firefighting in New York. And I think, cheers, we're out.
Cheers.